I'm Nate Elliott. I'm a principal analyst at eMarketer, where I cover how AI is changing consumer behavior and the marketing and advertising industry. I'm here at the Possible Conference in Miami, specifically at the Glance by InMobi Cabana at the Eden Rock Palladium Pool, and I'm joined today by Abhay Singhal, the co-founder of InMobi Group and the CEO of InMobi Advertising. Abhay, thanks so much for having me.
Good to have me here, Ned.
So today we're going to talk about how AI is changing consumer behavior and what that means for advertisers and for publishers. I want to start with this thing that I know InMobi's been talking a lot about, which is how AI is pushing people away from the passive consumption of advertising to a more active AI-led form of discovery. And I'm curious for your thoughts on what that means in terms of how people discover brands and in terms of which brands even get to be part of that process.
Look, AI is changing everything. If you start from a basic consumption, I think we're all moving away from search-based consumption to a research-based consumption. And AI is really, really making it possible. So rather than asking the search engine a question and getting 20 links that you have to browse and make an assessment yourself, you're asking AI a fundamental question, and it is coming back to you with its analysis of what it thinks the right research looks like. And then human beings are engaging much more with that to figure out what the right answer for each one is. So in some sense, the consumption has become rather than search-oriented to research-oriented. And in that world, truly everybody can be represented. Because when it's research, what AI is ensuring is that everybody is part of that democratic search, and you're not really limited by those 10 links or 20 links that we were clicking before on a search engine. So in some sense, it is expanding the human capacity and capability to be more comprehensive rather than being limited by what we had previously.
Yeah. But as it expands who can play, it actually reduces the number of possibilities that are put in front of consumers, right? Instead of 10 links, many of which are going to contain 5 or 10 product reviews, for instance, it's recommending maybe 3 or 4 different products. Doesn't that actually make it harder for any individual brand to show up in front of that consumer?
Yes, you can say so. But the way I'm looking at how the results are coming out, you're actually beginning to see a more comprehensive research of what each product stands for. So for example, if you're looking for the shoe, now of course you're going to have your Nike and the Asics and the Puma and all of those brands represented. But it is not only just telling about those brands now, it is also telling about the suitability for each one of them in terms of the being a sneaker or a running shoe or whatnot. So it feels very much like a conversation that as a consumer, I would actually want to have with a salesperson in a store who is really walking me through these different brands and helping me understand and tuning all of those brands to my need. Now, it's also the brand's responsibility to represent themselves in a right manner. Just like when search came, every brand had to work on search engine optimization. I'm also seeing all the brands investing tons of time and energy on representing themselves in a right way in answer engines from an optimization perspective. So I think who gets to represent and who doesn't get to represent is truly a difference between who gets to use this right technology versus who does not. It is not a limitation of AI as much as it wasn't the limitation of search engine.
Okay. Now, InMobi, of course, works with clients all over the world. And I'm curious, are you seeing this change in consumer behavior, this change from passive to active, happening more quickly or more slowly in different parts of the world?
You know, it's very interesting. And I've been in this industry for long enough to know that some of these diffusion takes different timelines in different markets. AI is probably the only technology where I'm seeing diffusion to be very, very uniform. The limitation of AI distribution or adoption is actually in terms of the token cost and the cost that is being incurred in delivering the results. So it is less about consumers' willingness to adopt this technology, but it is more about the whole cost paradigm that is needed to support those. Okay. Unlike some of the previous technologies, I believe the adoption of that is very, very rapid. and only limited by the AI's capability to reduce the cost.
Okay.
Not anything else.
But it sounds like that means you are seeing more uptake or more aggressive adoption in some of the wealthier markets.
I'm seeing the adoption everywhere. I'm seeing the adoption everywhere. Like if you even look at India, and India is our home base, it's probably one of the largest markets for all the chatbots already by a factor of 10. Uh, but then the monetizability of those users is under question at this point in time. But the users are truly engaged with this new AI experience, probably 2 to 3 times more than what I am seeing some of the consumers engaged in, say, in the United States.
Okay.
So while the consumption is much higher in the developing markets, the monetizability of that is not yet there. Versus when you come to the wealthier markets, I think the consumption and the monetizability has hit at equilibrium,
Okay.
which is where I think that now, as you launch these newer propositions, as you launch the brand propositions or brand agents or ads, I think they can effectively neutralize the cost of token consumptions and make the technology really viable.
Okay. One thing I've been thinking about is with the increase in AI-driven discovery and with agent-to-agent shopping and discovery on the near horizon, where does that leave the concept of brands and branding?
So I'm a big believer that this whole advertising that is mid-funnel is actually going to broken up into top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel advertising. Why do I say so? The mid-funnel advertising was pretty much all about research. The amount of time, which insurance to buy, which car to buy, which housing agent to choose if I need to, do a property transaction, and so on and so forth. That's what pretty much all comprises of mid-funnel. But for something to enter the mid-funnel and the consideration, you still need to be remembered by the consumer. So the brands have to work hard to be able to come in the consideration set, but not in the same way that they've done in the past before. They have to be more authentic, they have to be more conversational, and they have to be more precise about why a consumer should consider them at first spot. But that is not sufficient, because if they are doing so, so many other brands are doing so. So when you have the top of the funnel, then you come at the bottom of the funnel, assuming that you appear in the research when the consumer is asking a question. Then what is the additional incentive that you are giving to the consumer to actually choose you over somebody else? Of course, you have a value proposition, but then every consumer is looking to get more out of their money. And hence, at that point in time, this agent-to-agent interaction is going to put the user interest at the center and will seek all of these brands to really come out with their best proposition to the consumer. So, for example, I'm seeing, in fact, some of the ad formats that we are launching are very value transaction in nature. For example, I've done my research. I now have zeroed down to these 5 pair of shoes. Which shoe is the most economical from a bang for a buck perspective? That is not top of the funnel. That is bottom of the funnel.
Right.
But if you were not top of the funnel, you won't come into the consideration set. So that's why I actually think that in the agent-to-agent interaction, both are important. The brands need to be very precise about why the consumer should choose them over somebody else, but that is not sufficient. They have to be very precise about what is that value that they are delivering over and above somebody else to be the one that the consumer presses the button on.
Okay. And it sounds like the incumbent brands who've spent all this money over 100 years to build that incumbency, to build that brand advantage, it sounds like they're back in a dogfight.
Look, I think I always look at, consumer in the center. I always look at that ultimately every brand, every company, every product exists to deliver more value to the consumer. So every brand needs to continue reinventing itself in the new age technologies. I mean, look at before Meta, D2C wasn't a concept. And then Meta came and they created this whole D2C, and there are these great D2C brands that have become large marquee brands that weren't present 10, 15 years ago. And I actually think that this medium will give birth to maybe these completely new set of brands that are going to be taking over the user's imagination, because they're going to be playing by these new rules that are being set up. And the great brands that you and I both love are also going to figure out what does it mean to remain relevant in this industry. So that's the beauty of capitalism, that at the end of the day, we all exist to make the life of the consumer better. And that is what we all will do going forward. And those who do better will end up finding a way to survive, and those who don't will perish.
Yeah. So you founded InMobi about 20 years ago now.
That's right.
And in that time, you've seen dozens of major technological changes in our industry, some of them like real-time bidding or Meta ushering in the direct-to-consumer business model have had just an enormous impact on the way marketing and advertising works. Some that we thought were going to be huge, things like blockchain or the metaverse, seem to have fizzled out. This may come out of left field, but how do we know that AI is going to really change this industry in the way some of those big technologies have and not become another blockchain? How do we know it's not going to fizzle?
I think, look, and I've seen blockchain and metaverse, but if I were to ask probably 10 people around this place, how many of us as a consumer we adopted metaverse really? Or how many of us as a consumer could explain blockchain outside that very small community of, few tens of millions of consumers who were really interested in that? Today, when it comes to the AI, even my mom, who's 70 years old, is talking about AI and is using that to converse in the way that she hasn't. And that is when you know that this technology is here to stay. When my 12-year-old daughter and my 70-year-old mother is adopting this technology in a way and manner that it has not been imagined before, is the way when you see this is here to stay.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody needs to prove it to anybody that this is here to stay. I mean, all of our consumption has changed. All of our approach has changed. It's no longer the fad that I think blockchain or metaverse was at one point in time.
Yeah.
And the beauty is that to adopt to this technology, you don't have to change your actual consumption pattern. I mean, metaverse required you to maybe buy a new hardware, and blockchain
VR
required you to
headset
do
or-
a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Here, you don't have to do anything. You can use your existing investments, and suddenly the world looks much different to you
Yeah.
going forward. And that's, I think, the best testament of why this is different than anything else that has probably come before us.
So in my research, I focus on how people are using AI and how it's changing the way they discover and research and make decisions around products. I also look at how brands and agencies are using AI to improve the work that they do, to make it more effective and more efficient. Those are really the two main strands of how AI is changing the industry that I can see. And I'm curious, from where you're sitting, is one of those going to have a more meaningful impact on our industry than the other?
Look, it's hard to see which one is going to be more impactful than the other. I actually think everything is changing so rapidly that at this point in time, to be placing bet on one or the other is probably the worst thing that one can do. I think as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's sitting at the edge of the technology, I actually sit together and I tell my people that your only agency of survival is your ability to assume everything to be true and go hundreds of experiments. So we're working with brands, we're working with agencies, we're working with DSPs, we're working with every entity to basically be relevant to them, and in fact, work with their product teams and engineering teams in terms of the roadmap to come up with completely reimagining the solutions. And I was having this conversation with one of the very senior guys in industry just probably a few days ago, and I was extremely humbled by hearing her when she said that they don't know what is going to be true. And that's the state of the industry. I think every one of us, the opinions are changing so fast, so rapidly, that the only way one can survive is by being in it all the time and not taking sides. I spend so much time with the brands and agencies here. In fact, if you look at how their ecosystem is changing, it's so rapid. And I look at services industries, they are changing rapidly. So I don't know. I couldn't answer you to say which one is going to have more impact on or less, but I know that everything is going to be different in few months from now.
Okay. I mean, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for inviting us to your cabana and for taking the time to meet with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this time. And we look forward to remaining in touch and hopefully next year talking more about what has changed.
That sounds great. And thanks also to Glance by InMobi for making today's video possible. If you'd like to see more of eMarketer's coverage from the Possible Conference, you can go to our website emarketer.com/events.